Hi, everyone. Welcome again to our podcast. Today, I have a really fun topic and a really fun guest. I'm introducing you to Victoria Shepherd, who's a member of our digital team. She is a mover and shaker, a force of nature. We're joking offline. She reminds me of me when I was at the same stage of career. She just gets, we'll say it nicely, gets stuff up.
GSD.
A ball of energy and motion and very, very smart, digitally savvy. And we go back and we share the secret digital handshakes from, a decade and a half ago. So we've been at the same conferences. So thanks for joining our team, Victoria, and thanks for
Absolutely.
joining us today. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I am too. So what's really exciting about today's meeting will be I might kind of feel like a fireside chat. Two people who live in this world a lot. So those of you that follow our podcast or our blog or our content know this, but for the sake of those of you that are new to us, our agency works in the world of healthcare and especially privately or private equity owned businesses in healthcare. So most of our clients today are private equity owned. Some of our clients come to us directly from the private equity owner. Sometimes that we don't meet them as much, but we're more focused to the client, but they're owned by private equity. So that's most of our clients. I'm not sure what the exact percentage is, but it's over half these days. And a lot of those, we work in all the various specialties within multi-location providers. We work in addiction and medical, dental, physical therapy, all the different specialties and professions. And we also do work with SaaS, telehealth, and pharma and device and other things. But still, the sort of private equity-based world and investor-based world is really an intersection of what we're doing. And so some of you may have followed Scott Becker. I was on his podcast about a year ago. I was just sharing with Victoria. And the topic I spoke about very briefly on that podcast is still one of their most listened to podcasts. And I'll give you the premise of that for the sake of time. So the thing that I've observed working with so many private equity owned businesses is, rightfully speaking, they do spend their time on things like revenue cycle management, billing, collections, growing providers, building new locations, bringing in systems, cutting cost. But the one thing that I notice is they often really underestimate the value of the marketing and what marketing can do. So I'm not bitter. It doesn't hurt my feelings. My job is to educate people. And I can just tell you from my experience that marketing is an incredible revenue driving tool that can create predictable, profitable, and passive income and profits to a business. And it can also, poor marketing can actually put you in a negative place, making you less competitive, become a weakness for the business, and decrease its value. So that's in a nutshell what I talked to on the Scott Becker podcast about. And Victoria has her own experience that she's going to share with us in a few minutes. But one of the things I thought was really fun is she found an article by McKinsey about integrating marketing and brand in M&A, the way to superior growth. And like, Stuart, don't you talk about that all the time? I'm like, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
So Victoria, let's just talk about this a little bit. So you've got your own experience. I've done a lot of the talking so far, but tell us about your experience with, just broadly why this topic intrigued you and why this caught your eye, besides the fact that this is kind of a common thing we talk about all the time.
Yeah, I think it was the conference that you were speaking at, Invest, and the people that were going to be there were private equity. And since you and I are, obsessed with the digital space and marketing, I was just doing some research and, like you said, found this McKinsey article. And then I, in my previous life, have worked with companies to help grow for an M&A. And one thing that's kind of severely undervalued or really not focused on was the digital footprint and making sure your marketing was all sorted. And it was funny because I found a statistic and I thought it'd be interesting to share is that the failure rate due to poor brand communications, approximately 85% of mergers fail due to lack of brand communications, and integration, which is part of marketing. This underscores the critical role of effective brand communication in preventing M&A failures. And then another quote I found in another article, it could have been the McKinsey one or could have been another one, was nothing is more important to the success of a merger than brand, yet it's the thing most overlooked. So brand comms, that all kind of falls under, marketing, because communications, what do? We communicate to the ideal customer profile. We communicate to the client, so it's just kind of something that really kind of appealed to me. And I just kind of wanted to hear your experiences and kind of chat about, like, if someone was going to do an M&A, what would it look like from a digital perspective? What would they do, like, before, during, and after, kind of like the due diligence and things like that. So I just thought it'd be neat to chat with you about that, Stuart.
Oh, for sure. I want your experience too. Like, that's why we're colleagues in arms over here. So I would set this up mostly. I wanted to have you do most of the talking today because I think you've got a lot of news. People have heard me speak before, so I definitely want to get your input. I'm looking through the article that you shared with me, and it is really crazy how much that fits some of the stuff we've been talking about for a while. And I thought that the idea of, how do we scale this? So I think the first thing is that the McKinsey article was arguing for was creating a thorough sort of digital footprint assessment. And you're in the middle of those a lot with us. So let's talk about that process, from websites to social media to all the different things that are involved with that. Since you're on the ground doing that with the team, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's so important to do that, making sure your copy's up to date, making sure you've got high quality, relevant content. Your blog isn't on a set it and forget it mode, and neither is your social media. I know so many brands who will set up like a Google local business profile or a social media like a Facebook page or even a local company LinkedIn profile and just set it, and it just doesn't look, optics aren't really attractive. So I just am amazed that people still do a kind of a set it and forget it approach. So if I was to guide someone, I would be like, set it up for success, making sure your website and content has like the high quality, relevant content that's up to date, making sure your profiles look active, and engaging, you're engaging with the clients. And then most importantly, or I think one of the most, is online reputation management. There's so many, skeletons under, I guess, page 2 of Google. So I think it's, it's just something that people need to do their due diligence. And it's not just for like the M&A, but it's for the user experience and making sure like your current customer post merger is going to be still happy with the process. So I know it goes all over the place, but I think it's just making sure you have that, you assess your footprint, and then you develop a strategy and what does that look like?
So I'm curious about any anecdote you'd like to share, either somebody you've worked with here more recently or somebody in the past where that was such an important issue that you wanted to focus in on. And you can talk about our experience as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I used to work with Medicare agencies, just agencies in general. And it was private. The ICP, the ideal customer profile, was the agent. And I would always talk to them, and I still talk to them about, hey, what are you going to do when you're retired? Have you thought about that? And what does that look like? And it's fascinating because if you're a bigger agency, it might look different than like the individual, but I still think that it's really important to have your brand and your reviews and everything be set. And from my experience, when I was working with agents, I was asking them, like, what's your kind of retirement plan? And I said, do you ever even consider your website making sure it's up to snuff? And they would completely just not really think about that because they were so focused on like their Rolodex or their books of business. And I said, well, eventually that's going to be handed on to someone else that you need to trust, but you need to make sure like the communications and the marketing still stays there and it doesn't get lost. So it was just interesting talking to agents and agencies. They just didn't think about that.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that it's just so funny. It feels like we're reading each other's stuff with the McKinsey list here. But it talked about developing a robust digital marketing strategy, which is kind of like what we do every day. So,
Mhm.
when you're involved with like our clients at so many different levels, but when we think about digital strategy, here it just talks about sort of very briefly, sort of a McKinsey way about setting goals and utilizing multiple channels and optimizing. But what are some of your thoughts there? And I know you've combined this also with some other resources, but let's talk about digital strategy and how that's so important to have in place.
I mean, I think it is so important, and having not just the 30, 60, 90-day plan, but having the year over year plan is so important, especially in the healthcare space. I think, and it's similar to e-commerce, but not really. Like when you're in healthcare, there are trends. Like for example, urgent care. We know cold and flu season is going to be, really a part of the initiative. So when you're setting up a strategy, like any other strategy, it's maybe you're thinking maybe you're gonna load your paid search, maybe it's going to be towards those seasonal times when people get sick. Like that's just kind of one of those in the weeds types of things. I think people often forget that content calendars are so important, and aligning with your paid. I've been in so many organizations where paid and sales and even social SEO are so siloed that I think that organizations, if they really kind of smurge those together and let the marketing team, the digitals, be over and hear the sales team and what are they doing, and building that into the marketing strategy, I think is really important. And then another thing that I think we talk about is, obviously when you're going to do an M&A, is making sure that lead gen, that pipe is staying full up, and making sure that you're even down to your CRMs. CRMs, when you're scoring an MQL to an SQL, like that changes often. So that also should be a part of your strategy. Because a lot of people don't necessarily adjust their scoring based on like trends and what's going on and how their business is evolving or changing. And then a final thing I think that we really need to be focusing on, especially because we're in healthcare, is compliance and security. We've got regulations. FTC comes out all the time. We have to deal with HIPAA compliance. We've got to being a good steward for our clients and making sure that they are doing their due diligence. I mean, across the board, but like especially if you're talking about like a M&A, making sure that when it migrates over to the next organization, that they are going to maintain that integrity.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, you've hit on a lot there. So I'll just add some comments of
Yeah.
mine and to highlight some additional points. So when we work with clients, and Victoria is very familiar with this already, but we often talk about 6 ways to grow a healthcare business. And there's one of the ways, just simple context, I wrote this article years ago, and it's still one of our most read. And so I'll cover them for you now. So one is, the first strategy that's sort of at the core of everything is building the right brand, right? So that's a long discussion we can get into another day, but building a really strong brand is a foundation. Digital marketing, well, of course you're going to talk about that, story. That's what you guys do. But in this case, I'm really talking about digital marketing, especially as it relates to getting patients or customers or healthcare consumers or residents, whatever it is that your clients you're trying to reach. The third category is traditional advertising. And I was just talking to our traditional advertising buyer, Charlie, a few minutes ago, and he shared with me the amount of money being spent in the Chicagoland market by the top advertisers, and it's jaw-dropping. I mean, there's a lot of younger marketers who think that traditional marketing is dead, and I almost, start to believe it sometimes because we're so digital here. But believe me, traditional advertising is alive and well, and that's still
Yeah, and I mean, I worked for for tenure for Blue Cross Blue Shield brand, Florida Blue, and my experience was dealing with that offline to online, because we would do emails, we would have member kits for new members, for under 65 for Medicare, and then I had experience with working with multi-location urgent cares, and I would be amazed at a magnet on a door, the success that campaign would do versus like a postcard was interesting. So it's something like, and yeah, a magnet's probably like a more expensive, but the calls that I would see in call rail from like this magnet that we did was just really neat because, and I think that's another thing is like the offline talking to the online, making sure that you've got those tracking phone numbers. I know I'm talking in the weeds, but I tend to do that anyways. But I just need to like for people to understand.
We love it. Just keep going.
Like having like even URLs on your postcards. Like people just will put an arbitrary URL, and you can never track the success of your traditional marketing. And I think that's really important, especially that print is very expensive.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like we're in a. I mean, I could go on a tangent right now, but I would even say that we're seeing all the because the election coming up, we're seeing so many direct mail pieces from different people coming out. I would almost be giving the healthcare people a tip. Like, maybe you should pause it until like after it's done. Getting inundated. I don't want your like postcard to like get in the weeds with all that stuff. But yeah, I think it's so important and it needs to be considered. And if you have budget, I think definitely testing direct mail is integral.
For sure. And so we covered branding, digital, and then traditional. And the other three areas of opportunity are PR broadly, which is a topic for another day, HCP marketing or doctor referral building, or how do you build, B2B would be another way of looking at it. That's a huge category. And that, again, is a really big issue. And then finally, what's the patient experience? And that includes, but it certainly isn't limited to, how do you take those inquiries? How do you convert them from an inquiry to a patient? So those 6 categories are all sort of strategic levers as a business. From a marketing standpoint, you can pull, and it depends on the type of business we're working with. So, like Victoria brought up insurance or like Medicare or Medicare Advantage, especially. Like that's definitely, they're targeting seniors, always TV, live events, agent support, insurance agent support. Those are all parts of it. Dermatology, a lot of times they have just the greatest world from a marketing standpoint because they have doctor referrals, they have patient referrals, and they have all the other things that we can do for them. So marketing is important to them, but they don't perceive it as important to, like, for example, addiction, where most of them are like half of their business comes from marketing. Like it's really vital. Marketing suffering, they feel it right away. So the point, again, going back to our theme a minute ago, is any business we work with in healthcare, marketing can help a lot. Sometimes it's absolutely vital, and weaknesses can hurt. So as you're thinking about the value of your business, you want to make sure that the marketing is in place. So one thing I'd like to talk about, Victoria, and you've been part of this process. We certainly do this a lot. A lot of our clients will come to us. Sometimes they just say, just do our paid search and our SEO and all those things. But ideally, a lot of times they ask us, to start with, I always refer to this as a patient history, exam, diagnosis, and treatment plan. In other words, we do a marketing plan for them. It's a 4 to 6 week process, and we do a whole lot of due diligence. And so I'd like you to talk through about some of the due diligence that can help either guide the marketing. If you're looking to buy a property, you want to kind of get a sense of, because we get this sometimes from P&E. They want us to do the marketing plan to see where they are before they even buy it.
Yeah.
Or it may be that they want to build it to sell it later, or it could be, you're toward the end and you want to do it. Either way, all these times come back to doing the digital due diligence. So I'd like you to talk about that a little more, because you're heavily involved with that with our team.
Yeah, I think, and I want to give a shout out to Alex Connect, who is one of my SEO buddies, and he's been giving me a lot of insight into Google Analytics and what I think what people need to do is making sure their data is telling the truth and it's tidy. And you'd be surprised how with the emergence of G4, GA4 is that people aren't setting it up properly because they're so focused on how it used to be, and they're trying to squeeze into how it used to be into how it is now, and that's not the case. So I think for us guiding them, any client is doing their data and doing a data audit and making sure like their things are set up and things are firing and tags are and Google tags are appropriate and parameters are set up, because you can have data all day long and it can tell a story, but if it's not set up properly, then you're just wasting money. So I think that would be like my first thing, is making sure your data is sorted and it's ready for action and it's telling an accurate story. I think that's kind of like where I immediately like would talk about that.
For sure. And as we look at, we get new clients, and this is part of our, either at the front end when we're doing a marketing plan, or even if they don't do the marketing plan, eventually we usually do an SEO audit, a paid search audit, a paid social audit, a website audit. We're looking at all the technical things as well as the things. These things are in the machine that nobody else would know about. Some of these things are very obvious, like, does this website convert? Are we able to generate leads? Are we able to generate patients? What's our return on ad spend? Are we building, looking at the local listings? Like, all of these things are part of that digital footprint. And that's really important. Victoria, I'm curious what you think about this. Usually when we do, more often than not, it's kind of a mess across the board. Like you just mentioned, like, are the analytics set up right? Well, if they're not, then that's a whole mess, because that's guiding the buys on the ads, and it's also guiding the team optimizing, because they're making big decisions on bad data. But or the SEO is like, we just had somebody call us that had asked us to do wondered why the website was doing so poorly with SEO, and we checked, and it had a do not follow set up on it. So, well, there is that. So,
yeah.
Any fun anecdotes or not so fun anecdotes about, or just any additional insights on this topic about, because this is again, we could talk about any of these topics for hours, but on the analysis side, what other kinds of insights would you like to share?
I think this, and I wish I could find the story, but one of the anecdotes is, do you remember, and this was like a million years ago, when Toys R Us bought toys.com?
Vaguely, yeah.
And they did a 302, not a 301.
So explain what that means. Not everybody's in SEO land.
So basically, I don't know if this is old wives' tale, but it's a really great story, and you never want to get the truth in the middle of a great story. And I would love to find it. But from anecdotally, what I remember, and this was like early mid 2000s, is Toys R Us, for millions and millions of dollars, bought the domain toys.com. And a 302 basically tells Google, hey, this is the apartment that we're renting. We're not going to be here for very long. Right? Yeah, it's a temporary redirect. A 301 redirect is like, hey, I moved from here to here and I'm staying here. Like, I bought this house and I'm staying. We've got it. I've furnished it, everything. And then what happens is if you do a 302, all like your link juice and all the goods that came just kind of go out the gate. So it was just so funny to me. So I think, and even if that story is totally like an old wives' tale, I think doing your due diligence and making sure are your 301s doing 301s, and are you making sure like your links are, you're crawling your website, you're finding out what's wrong with it. You're doing keyword research or even just semantic research. I think now we talk about more about the intent. We could talk about, we had a conversation about addiction, like there's so many queries that are not being optimized for addictions. And we know people are out there that are struggling with their mental health, and the traffic's there, but sometimes those organizations aren't like really optimizing like their FAQ section for queries like that. So I don't know, I could go on a million different ways.
I have to interject. It's really funny because, as I mentioned earlier, Victoria and I are at the same conference, and nobody will get this, but the one tech geek on this listening to this podcast. But Matt Katz used to be the head sort of public face of Google to SEO. And we were both at PubCon when he announced the disavow tool, and both of us not only knew what that word was, but got excited. So that side of our past. And I do remember when at Bruce Clay, when I did my Bruce Clay training. One of the things I still remember is 301 is the one. 301 is the one. 301 is the one. Never 302. Always do a 301. So, but it's funny, those little things, irrespective of the story origins, really matter. And we see that all the time. Like, it's kind of like bringing your car in for repair, and you're like, I don't know why it's not moving. You're like, oh, you don't have any wheels. That might be part of the problem. And
Well,
the problem is the lack of wheels are hard for people to see or understand on a website.
Yeah, I mean, I even remember back in the day, I was working for a big brand and their blog looked completely different than the rest of their site. So it when you clicked on the blog, you're like, wait, where did I go? And so that you need to, from a design perspective, I mean, bring Brett on that discussion, but from a visual place, there needs to be consistency throughout the site too. And making sure your customers stay engaged and they don't feel like they just went down to a different, location on a website, So I think we didn't even talk about, UX, but that could even be its own, conversation. So
I would love to hear, you also had some thoughts for me as we were preparing here about, post mergers. So we talked about, preparing for the merger. We talked about making sure you have your ducks in a row. Share some thoughts about sort of post merger from your perspective.
So I think you want to, post merger, I think you need to have a seamless strategy with, the people that you're buying from. Make sure that everything stays succinct. And if there's an opportunity for the customer experience to be stronger, then make sure that strategy is built out. Whatever you do, you don't want to dilute or, like I said earlier, have the customer experience or anything be an issue. So I think you want to ensure that there's consistency, like I was mentioning earlier with that blog and website. Merge your websites and your social media accounts. And then I think a big one is, apart from your data, is really about the communications. If that is a part of that needs to be spoken about, really telling your customers from an internal communication, hey, this is what happened, but please, you're going to get the best experience. Even though we've merged or we've been acquired, so I feel like telling that message is, I think, so important to not lose the trust of your current database, essentially.
Great. Last question before we wrap up today, or discussion point / question, is branding. So we talked about brand, we referenced it a little bit, and both of us are, I love all of it, right? But the SEO part is kind of like my first love, at least within recent years. But branding is really, really critical. And so, it's Paul, as the head of our account team, would tell you, and strategy and brand, the stuff that he does, all these digital marketers just jump straight to all this fun digital stuff, but the brand is at the essence of it. So I'd just love any additional thoughts you have about, and this is all consistent, hallway discussion, if you would, virtual hallway discussion here at our company. But give me a sense of any thoughts you have at all about the brand and, in terms of, again, this topic of preparing for or following merger, adding value to the business. Any comments there?
Yeah, I think just from a basic creative asset, having your asset library, making sure that's being accounted for. Because what you don't want to do is you buy a company and all of a sudden all that marketing collateral is just gone. I think you need to kind of take notes and make a checklist of all those things, from what is the brand messaging, what's the tone, what is our voice going to change, or is it going to remain the same? Is our messaging going to be unified? Because it has to be unified. Yes, Facebook and maybe LinkedIn are obviously different spaces, but for the most part, your tone and your messaging and your visuals and the brand should be consistent across the whole board. And I guess that's kind of what I would be be making sure that I would be doing my due diligence about that. I don't know what you think about it.
It totally is. And we're wrapping up here. I just want to say there's a lot to this topic. So just to go back to our theme at the very beginning was, so often people in the investment world, and also people that are buying or selling a business, really just aren't giving marketing much energy. I get there's many other things that are important, right? The personnel issues, recruiting, doctors, payment, finance, all those things. But that marketing is a huge either asset or albatross depending on where you are, and it's something to be thought through very deeply in the consideration, all the way from the branding to the online reputation and the presence through the sales systems and the conversions and all these things. Anyway, Victoria, it is such a joy leading a company with such smart people, and love having you on our team. It was really fun to share your thoughts. You're such a pro at all the stuff you touch, and just this stuff to us here at our agency is a playground.
No, I love it. No,
we love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, because I've dealt in the carrier space. I've dealt in the agency space for insurance agents. I've dealt with like I said, the M&A space, products. Have worked with healthcare products, and then personally, I'm a caregiver. So we were talking about the other day, and I was like, "Oh, don't get me started." So I'm a content library when it comes to caregiving. So, which is interesting that another conversation, but a lot of private equity companies are bringing up assisted living facilities too.
Yeah, for sure. So I appreciate your time, everybody, today. For lots more resources, if you're not there already, healthcaresuccess.com. Thanks, Victoria. This was just as fun as I expected it would be.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well.